Hello everyone, my name is LaShawn, and today I will be talking about the effects of an abusive household on the emotional development of late adolescence. It is truly an unfortunate fact that there are many children out there who are either suffering through or have suffered through constant forms of abuse and domestic violence. A Lehigh longitudinal study of 457 youth states that out of that number, 404 of those children were exposed to some form of child abuse and/or domestic violence. This data was taken from an empirical study titled The Effects of a Child Abuse and Exposure to Domestic Violence on Adolescent Internalizing and Externalizing Behavior Problems by Carrie Moylan. Within this study, Moylan and her co-authors, based on the data given, noticed the strong correlation between children who have been through some kind of abuse and how they behaved outside the home, such as children feeling constantly anxious, depressed, or even being aggressive towards their peers. An article from Child Psychiatry Today titled Long-Term Effects of Domestic Violence on Child Development mentioned children who were struggling with domestic violence may have difficulty forming healthy relationships and are suffering with low self-esteem and confidence issues. Continuing through the article, it talks about how a lack of emotional support may cause the children to struggle with expressing emotions, seeking help, and developing a positive sense of self-worth, which would be very detrimental to a child's emotional development, especially when they move into their late adolescence. Speaking of, reading through an article which was actually a review of a book called Child Abuse and Neglect, titled The Impact of Exposure to Domestic Violence on Children and Young People, a review of the literature, it talks a lot about the book, of course. But it also goes into detail about what comes after the abuse. Trauma. Children who have or are suffering through abuse will most definitely have to deal with trauma that comes after it. The trauma that these children carry will most likely be with them for their entire lives, which would cause problems in their everyday life outside of the home or even in their own family situations when they grow up. Up to this point, I have discussed how children are affected by abuse directly, but there is still such a thing as indirect abuse. In an empirical study titled Domestic Violence and Its Impact on the Social and Emotional Development of Young Children by Dr. Catherine Kitzman, in the article, Dr. Kitzman mentions that around 29.4% of children in dual parenting homes live in a family in which partner violence has occurred. Unfortunately, even though the child may not be the direct recipient of said violence, they could still be caught in the crossfire and experience psychological distress. In her empirical study of 118 children, 63% of them were faring more poorly than the average child. Most of these children were dealing with problems such as aggression, anxiety, difficulties with peers, and academic problems. These stats only show how harshly domestic violence affects the child. As I digged deeper into my topic, I found an article titled Children's Exposure to Domestic and Family Violence by Monica Campbell. Miss Campbell is native to Australia and did her research based on Australian stats. With that in mind, I noticed that child abuse and domestic violence is not just something that exists in America. There are many cases found worldwide of children living in toxic households. Reading through the article, Ms. Campbell states a disturbing fact. Domestic and family violence affects children's physical and mental well-being, developmental and schooling, and is the leading cause of children's homelessness in Australia. Not only would children suffer through a terrible home environment, but they might not even have a home to go back to. Continuing to look globally, I stumbled upon an article titled Long-Term Impact of Domestic Violence on Individuals, an empirical study based on education, health, and life satisfaction by Louis Bo. Bo and their co-author, Peng Yating, are native to China, and their empirical study takes data from the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Survey. In their article, they break down the information within the survey on the effects of domestic violence and those who have grown up and are out of the family home. With said information, Bo and Yating state that domestic violence should not be unchecked. There should be a system built to monitor it, and domestic violence should be confronted. Even after years of being outside the house, the effects of abuse and domestic violence persist. Abuse in a child's life can truly cause major physical and emotional damage. After reading through all of these articles, I can tell that I've just barely scratched the surface. There are a ton of different cases around the world of children suffering in silence and not speaking up. So I hope what I have presented here will help shed some light and bring some suffering out of the darkness.